Now when you're hanging out with family and friends, there's generally three topics you want to stay away from, because whenever you bring either of those three topics up, it almost always starts a fight. One of them is politics, religion, and then there's epoxy river wood projects. And we're going to get into one of them today. You guessed it, we're going to talk about religion today. I'm just kidding. Don't worry about that. We're going to get into an epoxy river project. Since this is my first epoxy river project, I wanted to start out with a project that was both small and a personal project that'll be for me and my girlfriend. So to start this project off, I'm chopping up some melamine and I'm going to make a form out of that for the epoxy. I wanted to go with the form first because I wanted to use this form to set the dimensions of my final project. Then what I did was I added a 1/4 inch to each side. That way, whenever everything's dried and done and I'm ready to trim it down, I can trim that 1/4 inch off of each end and come up with my perfect dimensions for my final piece. Now for this project, I went ahead and lopped off a chunk of walnut slab for this, and then I went over and used my track saw to actually cut it in half. Using the table saw for this might have been suffice, but I didn't want to free feed it through there, being that the sides are both not straight. They're kind of live edge sides, so I didn't want to hold them up against the fence and then feed it through and risk having a kickback incident. Now to prepare this mold, what I did was I put some silicone caulking in all of the corners the whole way around this thing, and then I wiped it in there pretty tight to the corners, and then I covered every surface that's going to be touched with this stuff with some Tyvek tape. The idea here is to create a complete surface where the epoxy won't bond to the surface at all, because if the epoxy bonds, it just makes this a nightmare to get it apart. Then you also want to make sure that your epoxy don't end up leaking outside of the mold, because it will. It'll find the smallest hole and it'll leak completely out onto your table, onto your floor, and just ruin everything anywhere near this project. So then I laid my pieces of wood in here with the live edges facing towards each other. Then I'm going over all of the live edges with some epoxy to seal it off nice and tight. Now the reason you want to do this before the pour is because your wood is porous, so you're putting this epoxy on and you're replacing air that's in the wood with epoxy. And you don't want that process to be happening while you have a thick pour into the wood, because that air will come out into the mold and start showing air bubbles throughout the mold as it dries. For this project, I'm using a liquid glass deep pour epoxy. It's a 2-inch pour epoxy. It has a working time of 4 to 6 hours, which I find to be ideal for a new person like myself at this, because it gives me plenty of time to mess stuff up and try to fix it. But it also gives bugs and dust a lot of time to go ahead and get in your epoxy project. So it's got its pluses and its minuses. There's a little give and take there. Making sure you have a thorough mix is really important when working with epoxy. So I'll spend about 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes mixing it, and then I'll switch containers, pour it out into another one, and then go ahead and spend another few minutes mixing it there, just to make sure it is thoroughly mixed. Then when I add some color, it gets some bonus mixing time. So yeah, make sure that stuff is mixed up really well so that you don't have any soft spots. Now the mixing process is going to go ahead and froth a whole bunch of bubbles all through that epoxy. So I like to utilize some of that working time by putting it in a vacuum chamber for about 20 minutes or so. And what this does is it accelerates the process of getting that air bubbles to the surface and then popping them off. And then I will pour it into my mold, and for the most part the air bubbles will be gone. Some air bubbles will get reintroduced as we pour, but that'll be really simple and really easy to blow off. With this type of pour, This part of my process might not be necessary. You just might have to babysit it a little bit more with your torch. And you can see by the end of about a 20-minute period of time, the bubbles pretty much took care of themselves and it come out of the chamber pretty much crystal clear. Just a couple of bubbles left to blow off, that's about it. And now it is time to pour. This is actually going to be my first pour. I wanted to have a layer of color, which is this blue, and then I wanted to follow that up with a layer of clear that comes to the full thickness of the wood. Now the pouring process does put some more bubbles into the mix, but they're usually pretty big bubbles and they're not like the little micro bubbles that you get whenever you're mixing. So they rise to the surface really quick and then they blow off with a torch super easy. And this is what it looks like the next day. So we'll go ahead and mix up some clear and get that thrown on top of this. Oh no! Oh no. I forgot to put tape on these. Two of them are wet. Three of them are wet. Oh, that's going to be a problem. That's going to be a problem. I guess woodworking you learn, right? So it did end up being a little bit of a pain to get this thing to release from the mold. It took a little bit of hammering, some prying, then taking apart the whole mold, some more hammering, some more prying, and eventually it let loose. I did some more research on this, and apparently they do make a mold release spray, where if you spray this in your mold, it's supposed to make it super easy to get it loose from your mold. It works as if it's like PAM for woodworking, I guess. I'm a little bit scared to use it because I'm scared of what could happen if you introduce a new chemical to your epoxy mold. I don't know what will happen with that. Send me some feedback in the comments. Let me know what your experience is with using mold release for these. But two things I'm happy about with this process is one, it did not leak and it did not bond to any of the melamine, other than the pieces that were on top that I didn't have taped off. So yeah, we did something right. Well, the first one of these went well, so let's get on to the next one. Now these Japanese pool saws, they work amazing for wood. But wood that's soaked in epoxy, it's a workout. My forearms were aching after this. Whew, got that one done. Now I got a whole nother one to go. This is painful, but you know, lesson learned. Make sure you tape them off the next time. Now that disaster is taken care of, we'll go over to the drum sander and work that board down to perfectly flat surfaces on both sides. And now's the time to go ahead and trim off both of the sides, because you get that weird epoxy layer on the sides whenever you go through these molds. So you want to trim that off of both sides and then trim off both ends and then get your dimensions perfect and make sure everything's perfectly square. And here we will get to the dreaded part of sanding. Now because this is an epoxy project with some clear epoxy on it, sanding is a lot different than most of your regular wood projects. For a normal wood project, I'll go from like 80 grit to about 220, and I'll do like 1 or 2 grain pops and then be pretty satisfied with that. But with this, I had to go all the way down to 10,000 grit and then go to a buffing pad. Now 10,000 grit, is that too much? It may be, I don't know. It almost seems like we're rubbing a piece of cardboard paper on it at 10,000 grit, but it seemed to have made a difference. But I think some other people stop somewhere around 7,000 grit. I don't know. Let me know in the comments below where you go whenever you do an epoxy project. I did end up catching myself going ahead in sandpaper a couple of times, a little bit faster than what I should have, and had to step back 2 or 3 coarse grits twice. basically had to step back to solve some little bit of sanding marks from some lower grit. So this definitely took a considerable amount more time sanding, and then required some polishing after the sanding as well. True to what I said earlier, this did end up becoming a personal item, which ended up being a gift to my girlfriend for our 7th anniversary together. This laser engraver is one tool that I've gotten a surprising amount of use out of, and they're fairly cheap and easy to get your hands on. And there's a lot of different brands out on the market, and as far as I can tell, they're all pretty easy and intuitive and just easy to learn. I wanted to make this thing so that I can just hang it up on the wall in my kitchen. So I just put some keyhole slots in the back of it, and it'll hang on some nails that are in the wall. For the finish, I'm going with Rubio Monocoat. It's my first time using this stuff, and it's pretty expensive, but the trade-off is that it goes a long way. I mixed up what I thought was a very small amount, but I ended up using about twice as much as what I actually needed. So yeah, it's hard to call it expensive whenever it spreads like that. Then I installed some plain black drawer handles so that you can easily pick it up and carry it around with your charcuterie stuff on it. Charcuterie. Did I say that right? I don't know. That might be right. Charcuterie. And this is how it turned out. If you like this video, do me a favor and hit that like button. As always, if you want to see more videos like this, hit subscribe. I try to bring up a video every week or so. And go to the profile and check out more videos. And you can even check out the videos that are popping up on the screen like right about now. But till next time, make something awesome.